The crash site on Talos 3 looked like something had taken a bite out of the desert and spat it back up in all the wrong places. Jake Novak crouched beside the furrow of scorched earth and twisted metal, sipping coffee from his thermal mug while trying to figure out what kind of ship could have carved such an elegant scar across the landscape. Definitely not human design, he muttered to himself, examining the scattered debris. The metal fragments had a strange quality. They seemed to shimmer between colors, and some of the larger pieces appeared to be slowly reforming themselves into more aerodynamic shapes. Jake had been working the salvage station at Talos 3 for 3 years, long enough to recognize most ship classifications by their wreckage patterns. This was something new. Something expensive. And judging by the fact that the crash had happened less than 12 hours ago, something that might still have a living pilot. The main hull section had come to rest against a rocky outcropping about 200 meters from the initial impact point. As Jake approached, he could see that the ship was sleek and organic looking, built with flowing lines that made it seem more grown than manufactured. The cockpit canopy was cracked but intact, and through the transparent aluminum he could make out a humanoid figure slumped over the controls. "Hello." Jake called out, tapping on the canopy with his multi-tool. "Anyone alive in there?" No response, but his portable scanner showed life signs, weak but stable. Jake found what appeared to be an emergency release mechanism and managed to open the cockpit after several minutes of careful manipulation. The pilot was definitely not human, though she was close enough that Jake's first thought was relief rather than alarm. She was tall, elegant, with pale blue skin marked by intricate patterns that looked almost like tattoos but seemed to shift slightly in the light. Her ears were pointed, and her dark hair was bound back in a practical style that had somehow survived what must have been a spectacular crash landing. Her armor was unlike anything Jake had seen before, form-fitting, with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It looked military, but with an aesthetic quality that suggested whoever had made it cared as much about appearance as function. "Okay, lady, let's get you out of there," Jake said, checking her pulse and finding it steady. His medical scanner showed multiple injuries but nothing immediately life-threatening. Unconscious, dehydrated, probably concussed, but alive. Jake's communicator chirped with an incoming message from station manager Hendricks. "Novak, we picked up a massive energy signature about clicks from your position. Please tell me you're not about to do something stupid involving unknown alien technology." "Define stupid," Jake replied, carefully extracting the unconscious pilot from her seat. "Bringing unidentified aliens back to the station without proper quarantine protocols. Then you'll be happy to know I'm definitely not doing that." Jake looked around his own workshop, which was technically separate from the main station facility. "I'm bringing her to my place." "Jake, that's worse. It's also not technically your jurisdiction." "My workshop, my choice. Your funeral. But if she turns out to be carrying some kind of alien plague, I'm putting death by Good Samaritan syndrome on your epitaph." Jake carried the pilot back to his workshop, which occupied a converted cargo module that served as both his professional workspace and his living quarters. It wasn't much to look at: tool benches covered with electronic components, a small living area with basic amenities, and a jury-rigged medical bay that consisted mostly of a diagnostic scanner and a well-stocked first aid kit. He placed her on the medical cot and began a more thorough examination. The scanner confirmed his initial assessment: she was banged up but not in immediate danger. Her armor seemed to be some kind of self-contained life support system, with built-in medical monitoring that was far more sophisticated than anything Jake had access to. "Whoever you are, you've got expensive gear," he said, noting the way her armor's status lights shifted from red to amber as her condition stabilized. It took 12 hours for her to regain consciousness, during which Jake alternated between monitoring her condition and examining the salvageable components from her ship. The technology was fascinating: materials that seemed to repair themselves, power cells that maintained charge even after catastrophic damage, and control interfaces that responded to touch in ways that suggested some kind of neural integration. When she finally opened her eyes, they were a striking shade of gold that seemed to hold its own light. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice carrying an accent Jake couldn't place. My workshop. On Talos 3. You crashed pretty spectacularly about clicks from here. Jake set down the component he'd been examining and moved to the medical cot. How are you feeling? She sat up carefully, testing her mobility. Like I was shot down and crashed into a planet. Which, come to think of it, is exactly what happened. Shot down. Pirates. Caught me on a supply run and decided my cargo was worth the trouble of a fight. She looked around the workshop, taking in the modest surroundings with what might have been approval. I'm Zara, by the way. And I assume you're the person I have to thank for not dying of exposure in the desert. Jake Novak. And you're welcome. He activated his scanner again, checking her readings. You're looking much better. That armor of yours seems to have some serious medical capabilities. Standard issue for my unit. We can't always count on finding medical facilities in the field. What kind of unit requires armor that's sophisticated? Zara's expression became carefully neutral. Private security. Corporate protection, mostly. Nothing too exciting. Jake nodded, though something in her tone suggested the story was more complicated than she was letting on. Well, your ship is pretty well wrecked, but I think most of the major systems are salvageable. With the right parts and about a week's work, I could probably get her flying again. You do that? Sure. It's what I do, fix broken things. Jake gestured toward the components he'd been examining. Besides, I've never worked on technology this advanced before. It'll be a learning experience. I can pay you for the work. We'll worry about payment later. Right now, let's focus on making sure you don't have any complications from the crash. Over the next few hours, as Zara recovered her strength, Jake found himself genuinely enjoying her company. She was intelligent, well-traveled, and possessed a dry sense of humor that matched his own. When he showed her the salvaged components from her ship, she proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the technical specifications, offering insights that went well beyond what he'd expect from a typical security operative. This power coupling is designed for modular replacement, she observed, examining one of the damaged systems. If you reverse the polarity on the input manifold and bypass the secondary regulators, you can probably restore about 80% of the original efficiency. Jake stared at her. How do you know that? I've had to make field repairs before. You pick things up. That's not field repair knowledge. That's engineering expertise. Zara looked uncomfortable. I've had good teachers. As they worked together over the following days, Jake noticed more inconsistencies in Zara's story. Her standard issue armor incorporated technology that was decades ahead of anything he'd encountered. Her knowledge of starship systems was comprehensive enough to rival trained engineers. And she had an unconscious habit of giving orders rather than making requests, though she always caught herself and rephrased things more diplomatically. Most tellingly, she seemed to know a remarkable amount about galactic politics and interstellar trade routes for someone whose job was supposedly corporate security. You know, Jake said on their fourth day working together, for a private security operative, you seem to have traveled extensively through some pretty exclusive sectors. The job requires a lot of travel. Through the core worlds. Past the galactic defense perimeter. Zara paused in her work on the ship's navigation computer. Some clients have extensive interests. Clients who can afford to send their security teams into restricted space with experimental technology and unlimited expense accounts. Jake, what are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that your story doesn't quite add up. Your gear is too advanced, your knowledge is too comprehensive, and you carry yourself like someone who's used to being in command rather than following orders. Maybe I'm just very good at my job. Maybe. Or maybe you're something more than a hired gun who got unlucky with pirates. Zara was quiet for a long moment, her attention focused on the navigation computer's display. Does it matter? I guess that depends on what the truth is. The truth is that I'm someone who needed help, and you provided it without asking for anything in return. The truth is that I'm grateful for your kindness, and I don't want to do anything that might put you in danger. Put me in danger how? By telling you things that are better left unknown. Jake considered this carefully. Zara, in 3 years of salvage work, I've learned that the most dangerous secrets are usually the ones that affect the most people. Whatever you're not telling me, it's big, isn't it? She looked at him directly for the first time since the conversation began. Bigger than you can imagine. And if I knew the truth, then you'd understand why I can't tell you. Jake nodded slowly. Fair enough. But just so you know, whatever your real story is, it doesn't change the fact that you needed help and I was in a position to provide it. That's enough for me. Something in Zara's expression shifted, becoming softer and more genuine. You really mean that? I really do. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about what kind of private security work requires navigation charts that cover the entire galaxy. The kind that keeps me very busy, she replied, but this time there was warmth in her voice along with the evasion. As Jake continued his repair work, he found himself increasingly fascinated by the woman he was helping. Whatever her real identity, she was clearly someone important, someone with access to resources and knowledge that went far beyond anything a typical mercenary would possess. But she was also someone who seemed genuinely grateful for simple human kindness, someone who appreciated being treated as a person rather than, whatever it was she really was. Jake. Zara said as they finished their work for the day. Yeah. Thank you. Not just for fixing my ship, but for... She paused, searching for the right words, for treating me like a normal person. As opposed to what? As opposed to what I usually am. Jake looked at her, noting the weight those words seemed to carry. Zara, I don't know what your usual life is like, but for what it's worth, you're pretty good at being a normal person. I'm out of practice. Well, you've got a few more days to work on it before your ship's ready. She smiled, and Jake realized it was the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her. I think I'd like that. As night fell over the salvage station, Jake found himself wondering what kind of life required someone to be, out of practice, at being normal. But looking at Zara as she studied star charts with the kind of casual familiarity that suggested she'd navigated between worlds more times than she could count, he decided that some questions could wait. After all, everyone deserved the chance to be just themselves for a while, even if they were clearly much more than they appeared. By the 6th day of repairs, Jake Novak had come to 2 conclusions about his mysterious guest. First, Zara was without question the most knowledgeable person about advanced starship technology he'd ever met. Second, she was also the most evasive person about her background he'd ever encountered, which, considering his line of work brought him into contact with smugglers, pirates, and various other individuals with complicated pasts, was saying something. Hand me that plasma coupling, Zara said from inside the fighter's engine compartment, her voice slightly muffled by the surrounding machinery. Jake retrieved the component and passed it to her, marveling once again at how she seemed to know exactly where everything belonged in a ship that was supposedly unfamiliar to her. You know, most people would need schematics to work on alien technology they'd never seen before. I'm a fast learner. Fast enough to memorize the entire technical specifications of a ship you've only been working on for 6 days. Some people are good with music. Some people are good with languages. I'm good with machines. Jake watched as she effortlessly integrated the plasma coupling with the ship's power distribution network, her movements showing the kind of familiarity that came from years of experience with similar systems. Zara, that coupling you just installed. It's not standard configuration. You modified the connection interface to optimize power flow efficiency. Did I? Yes. And the modification you made is actually an improvement over the original design. A significant improvement. She emerged from the engine compartment, her face carefully expressionless. Lucky guess. That wasn't a lucky guess. That was advanced engineering. The kind of advanced engineering that takes years of specialized training to master. Maybe I had good teachers. Who? The Galactic Engineering Consortium. The Imperial Technical Institute. Jake was watching her face carefully. Because those are the only institutions I know of that teach the kind of modifications you just made. Zara's expression flickered for just a moment before returning to neutrality. I've worked with a lot of different people over the years. People with access to classified engineering techniques. Jake, why are you so interested in my educational background? Because your educational background is apparently more extensive than most starship designers, and you're supposed to be private security. Maybe I moonlight as an engineer. Maybe. Or maybe you're not exactly what you've told me you are. They stared at each other for a moment, and Jake could see Zara weighing her options, how much to reveal, how much to continue concealing. What do you think I am? She asked finally. I think you're someone with extensive technical training, detailed knowledge of galactic politics, access to experimental military technology, and the kind of natural authority that suggests you're used to being in charge of things. That's very observant. It's also not an answer. Some questions are better left unanswered. Jake set down his tools and looked at her directly. Zara, I've been helping you repair a starfighter that incorporates technology I've never seen before. Technology that's probably classified at levels I don't have clearance to access. If you're someone I shouldn't be helping, I'd like to know before I finish putting you back in the sky. Are you having second thoughts about helping me? I'm having first thoughts about what I might be getting myself into. Zara was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Jake, what if I told you that helping me was potentially the most dangerous thing you've ever done? I'd ask you to be more specific about the nature of the danger. And what if I told you that being specific would only make the danger worse? Then I'd probably decide that the danger is political rather than physical, which means it's the kind of problem that gets worse if you try to ignore it. You're very logical. It's one of my more charming qualities. Along with my stubborn refusal to abandon projects once I've started them. Even if finishing the project might put you at risk. Especially then. Zara, I don't know who you really are, but I know you're not a threat to me personally. If you were, you'd have done something about it by now. How can you be sure? Because you've had 6 days to hurt me, steal my equipment, or do whatever it is that dangerous people do to helpful engineers. Instead, you've been fixing your ship, sharing meals with me, and making conversation about everything except your actual identity. Maybe I'm just biding my time. Maybe. But I don't think so. Jake returned to his work, making final adjustments to the ship's navigation system. As he worked, he became increasingly impressed by the sophistication of the technology. The navigation computer alone had more processing power than most planetary defense networks, and its star charts appeared to be updated in real time from some kind of galactic database. This navigation system, he said, it's not just advanced. It's comprehensive. These charts cover trade routes, defense perimeters, and restricted space that most people don't even know exists. Standard military navigation package. For what military? The charts include sectors that are classified above my clearance level, and I've got salvage permits for most of the outer rim. Maybe my unit operates in unusual areas. Jake pulled up a specific section of the star charts, showing a region of space near the galactic core. Zara, this is the Veltani Imperial sector. The navigation data here includes internal system information that's supposedly restricted to Imperial Navy vessels. He watched her face carefully and saw her stiffen slightly at the mention of the Veltani Empire. I've worked in a lot of different regions, she said carefully. As private security? As security. Security for who? Someone with clearance to access Imperial Navy navigation data. Jake, you're asking questions that I can't answer. Can't or won't? Both. Jake studied the navigation display more carefully, noting the level of detail in the Imperial sector charts. Zara, this isn't just Imperial Navy data. This is command-level information. The kind of charts that would only be available to. He trailed off as the implications hit him. To who, Jake? To someone with very high-level Imperial clearance. Admiral-level clearance. Or higher. Higher, how much higher? Jake looked at her, pieces of a very large puzzle suddenly clicking into place. How high does Imperial clearance go? That's not a question I can answer. Imperial family level? Zara's expression became completely unreadable. Jake, I think we should focus on finishing the repairs. Imperial family. That's it, isn't it? Jake felt his pulse quicken as he realized what he might be looking at. You're not private security working for someone with Imperial connections. You are the Imperial connection. That's a very dangerous thing to suggest. Is it true? Jake. The technology, the knowledge, the way you carry yourself, the navigation charts, you're not just connected to the Veltani Empire. You're part of it. I think we've talked enough about this. Part of the ruling family. Jake, stop. How high up in the ruling family? Zara stood abruptly, moving toward the ship's communication console. I need to check for messages. Jake followed her, his engineering mind racing through the implications. The communication system. I noticed it was receiving encrypted transmissions, but I assumed they were from your security unit. They are. Except private security units don't typically use Imperial encryption protocols. How would you know what Imperial encryption protocols look like? Because I've worked on salvaged Imperial vessels before. The encryption signatures are distinctive. Jake gestured toward the communication display. Those aren't security unit transmissions, Zara. They're diplomatic communications. High-level diplomatic communications. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? The transmission headers include priority codes that are reserved for communications with Imperial royalty. Zara went very still. You've been reading my messages. The headers are displayed automatically when the system receives transmissions. I couldn't avoid seeing them. Jake looked at the communication display, noting the formal language visible in the message previews. Zara, those messages are addressed to someone with a royal title. Jake, please stop asking questions. Why? Because the answers are dangerous, or because they're impossible to believe? Both. Jake studied her face, seeing fear there for the first time since he'd found her. Not fear of physical danger, but fear of exposure, of losing something precious. You're not just Imperial nobility, he said quietly. You're someone important enough that your disappearance has generated high-priority search efforts. Jake. Someone important enough that diplomatic channels are being used to coordinate your recovery. Please. Someone important enough that the messages I can see are using titles I've only heard in formal diplomatic contexts. Stop. Your Imperial Majesty. The words hung in the air between them like an electric charge. Zara closed her eyes, and Jake could see her shoulders slump as if she'd been carrying a tremendous weight that had suddenly become unbearable. That's what the message headers say, Jake continued gently. Your Imperial Majesty. Which means you're not just Imperial nobility. You're the Empress. Jake, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. I'm getting myself into a situation where I've been repairing the personal fighter of the Empress of the Veltani Empire while she pretended to be private security. Yes. And she's been hiding her identity because revealing it would put me in danger. Serious danger. From who? Zara opened her eyes and looked at him directly. From people who want me dead, and who wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who's helped me. Jake considered this information with the same methodical approach he applied to complex engineering problems. So you crashed here while fleeing from people who want to assassinate the Empress of the Veltani Empire? Yes. And you've spent the past week pretending to be a warrior because revealing your true identity would make me a target? Yes. And now that I know the truth, I'm in danger regardless? Yes. Jake nodded slowly. Well, in that case, we'd better make sure your ship is fully operational before anyone figures out where you are. Zara stared at him. That's your response? We'd better fix the ship. What did you expect? Panic. Terror. Maybe demanding that I leave immediately before I get you killed. Zara, sorry, Your Majesty. Just Zara, please. Zara, you've been living in my workshop for a week. You've shared meals with me, worked alongside me, and treated me like a friend rather than a subordinate. If you wanted to hurt me, you'd have done it by now. But the people hunting me are hunting an Empress, not an engineer. As long as you're here, they're looking for you, not me. Jake, you don't understand the implications. Then explain them to me. But do it while we finish repairing your ship, because standing here talking about danger isn't making either of us any safer. Zara looked at him for a long moment, and Jake could see something shift in her expression, surprise, relief, and something that might have been gratitude. You're taking this remarkably well. I'm taking this like someone who's gotten used to his life being more complicated than he planned. Jake returned to the navigation system, making final calibrations. Besides, it's not every day I get the chance to have a casual conversation with Galactic royalty. It's not every day I get the chance to have a casual conversation with someone who doesn't want something from me. Jake looked at her, noting the weariness in her voice. Is that what your life is usually like? Everyone wanting something? Everyone always wants something from an Empress. Political favors, trade agreements, military protection, resource allocation. She moved to help him with the navigation calibrations, and Jake noticed that her movements had subtly changed, becoming more assured, more naturally authoritative. It's been refreshing, spending time with someone who just wanted to fix my ship. For what it's worth, you're pretty good at being a normal person. I haven't had much practice lately. Well, your secret's safe with me. At least until we get you off this planet and back to wherever Empresses go when they're not hiding in salvage engineers' workshops. Thank you. Don't mention it. Literally. Because I suspect that harboring fugitive royalty is against several laws I don't want to think about too hard. Zara laughed, and Jake realized it was the first completely natural sound he'd heard from her since learning her true identity. Jake. Yeah. When this is over, when I'm back to being an Empress instead of a stranded warrior, would you consider accepting a position as chief engineer for the Imperial fleet? Jake looked at her, noting the hopeful expression she was trying to hide. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you the chance to work on technology that makes this fighter look primitive. Tempting. But I'd have to think about it. Why? Because I'd miss having casual conversations with Empresses who are pretending to be warriors. Zara smiled, and Jake realized that whatever happened next, the past week had been worth the complications it was about to create. Jake Novak was in the middle of calibrating the final power coupling when his workshop's proximity alarms began shrieking with the kind of urgency that suggested something very large and very fast was approaching Talos, 3. That's not good, he muttered, checking his scanner displays. 3 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace in high orbit, sleek, predatory vessels that his identification system couldn't classify but that radiated the kind of menace associated with military hardware. Jake, Zara's voice was sharp with alarm as she emerged from her fighter's cockpit, where she'd been running final systems checks. We need to leave. Now. Those ships looking for you? Probably. And if they are, then staying here isn't safe for either of us. Jake was already powering down his workshop systems and gathering essential equipment. How long before they can get landing parties down here? Minutes. Maybe less if they're using fast attack shuttles. Then we'd better hope your ship is actually ready to fly. Zara's fighter had been transformed over the past week from a crashed wreck into what appeared to be a fully functional starship, but Jake knew the difference between appears to be functional and actually functional when it came to hastily repaired alien technology. The ship will fly, Zara said with the kind of confidence that suggested she'd been in similar situations before. The question is whether we can get airborne before they lock down the planet. They can do that? Imperial interdiction protocols. If they're really looking for me, they'll have deployed a gravity net that prevents any ship from jumping to hyperspace. Jake stared at her. You didn't mention that Imperial technology could trap people on planets. You didn't ask. I'm asking now. What else can Imperial technology do that might be relevant to our current situation? Planetary bombardment, atmospheric ignition, selective gravity manipulation, temporal spatial displacement. Zara was running through a mental checklist while simultaneously powering up her ship's systems. But they won't use any of those techniques if they think I'm still alive down here. That's reassuring. It would be more reassuring if I was certain they wanted to capture me rather than eliminate me. Jake felt his stomach drop. There's a difference. There's always a difference. The question is which option they've chosen. The proximity alarms shifted to a different frequency, indicating that the orbiting ships had launched smaller craft toward the planet's surface. Time to go, Zara announced, gesturing toward her fighter. I hope you don't mind tight quarters. Jake looked at the single-seat cockpit of her fighter and realized the flaw in their escape plan. Zara, that's a one-person ship. It is. Which means you'll be riding in the cargo compartment. The cargo compartment? It's pressurized and has its own life support. You'll be uncomfortable, but you'll be alive. And if the ship suffers damage during our escape? Then we'll both be dead, so the comfort level of the cargo compartment will become irrelevant. Jake decided this was not the time to argue about passenger accommodations. Lead the way. The cargo compartment turned out to be a cramped space behind the main cockpit, just large enough for a person to wedge themselves between storage containers and emergency equipment. As Jake squeezed himself into the available space, he reflected on how his life had become significantly more complicated since deciding to help a stranded warrior. Can you hear me? Zara's voice came through the ship's internal communication system. Yeah. And I can see the status displays from here. Which is either good or terrifying, depending on how this goes. Try to stay calm. Imperial fighters are built to handle situations like this. Situations like escaping from people who want to kill an Empress. Situations like outrunning superior numbers while carrying precious cargo. Jake felt the ship lift off with a smoothness that suggested the repairs had been successful. Through the small viewport in the cargo compartment, he could see the landscape of Talos, 3 falling away as they climbed toward orbit. How does it look out there? He asked. 3 heavy cruisers in high orbit, 6 interceptors moving to intercept us, and what appears to be a command ship coordinating the search pattern. 10 ships. Are those good odds or bad odds? For a normal pilot in a normal fighter? Very bad odds. And for an Empress in an Imperial fighter? Slightly less bad odds. Jake watched the tactical display as Zara maneuvered through the planet's atmosphere, the ship responding to her commands with a precision that made it clear she'd been flying Imperial fighters for a very long time. Jake, I need you to understand something, Zara said as the first enemy interceptors appeared on the scanner. The people hunting me, they're not pirates or mercenaries. They're Imperial Navy personnel who believe I'm unfit to rule. Your own people. Some of them. The ones who think my policies are too lenient, too focused on cooperation with other species rather than imperial dominance. So this is a civil war. This is a coup attempt. And if they succeed, the Veltani Empire will abandon every cooperative agreement we've made with other galactic powers. Jake felt the ship shudder as energy weapons fire passed close to their hull. How many people are we talking about? How much of the Imperial Navy is involved in this coup? I don't know. Which is why I need to get back to the Imperial capital and find out who I can still trust. The tactical display showed the interceptors closing on their position, weapons charging for another attack run. Jake watched as Zara executed a series of evasive maneuvers that should have been impossible for a ship of their size. This fighter, he said, noting how the ship seemed to anticipate the enemy's attack patterns, it's not standard Imperial Navy equipment, is it? No. It's my personal ship. Built with technology that's experimental. Experimental how? The control systems are integrated with the pilot's neural patterns. The ship responds to thought as much as to manual commands. Jake stared at the tactical display as their fighter performed maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. You're flying this thing with your mind. Partially. The neural interface allows for reaction times that are impossible with conventional controls. That's incredible technology. It's also classified at levels that could get you killed just for knowing it exists. I'm starting to see a pattern in our relationship. The ship shook again as enemy fire found its mark, though the damage appeared to be minimal. Jake watched as Zara's fighter returned fire with weapons that seemed considerably more powerful than their size should have allowed. How long until we can jump to hyperspace? He asked. We can't. Not from here. Why not? Because the gravity net I mentioned extends throughout this entire system. We need to reach the edge of the system before we can make the jump. How long will that take? At maximum speed? 43 minutes. And how long can we stay ahead of 10 Imperial ships? We're about to find out. What followed was the most terrifying and exhilarating 43 minutes of Jake's life. Zara's fighter danced through space like a living thing, evading weapons fire that should have destroyed them while returning attacks that systematically disabled their pursuers. The neural interface technology allowed her to anticipate enemy movements and execute countermeasures faster than any conventional pilot could manage. Jake, Zara said as they approached the system's edge, once we jump to hyperspace, we'll be heading directly to the Imperial capital. Are you prepared for that? Define prepared. Prepared to be in the middle of a potential civil war involving technologies that could reshape galactic civilization. Jake considered this. A week ago, my biggest concern was whether I had enough spare parts to fix a broken cargo hauler. Now I'm fleeing assassination attempts with the Empress of the Veltani Empire. Is that a yes or a no? It's a recognition that my life has officially moved beyond my ability to plan for contingencies. The ship's hyperspace drive activated with a sensation like falling in several directions simultaneously. Through the cargo compartment's viewport, Jake watched the stars shift from points of light to streaming lines as they made the jump to faster-than-light travel. We made it, Zara announced, and Jake could hear the relief in her voice. What happens now? Now we find out how much of my empire is still loyal to me. And if the answer is, not much? Then we find out whether one Empress and one engineer can build a resistance movement capable of preventing a galactic war. Jake looked at the status displays showing their course toward the heart of the Veltani Empire, toward a confrontation that could determine the fate of countless worlds. Zara? Yes. Next time I find a crashed ship in the desert, I'm just taking the valuable components and leaving the pilot for someone else to worry about. That seems wise. On the other hand, this is definitely the most interesting thing that's ever happened to me. Interesting is one way to describe it. What would you call it? Terrifying, dangerous, and possibly the most important thing either of us will ever do. Jake settled back in his uncomfortable cargo compartment seat, watching the stars stream past as they raced toward the Imperial capital and whatever awaited them there. Well, he said, at least it won't be boring. Jake. Yeah. When we get to the capital, things are going to change. I'll be back to being an empress, dealing with imperial politics and managing a crisis that could tear the empire apart. I figured. What I'm trying to say is, this week, being able to just be myself, working alongside someone who treated me like a normal person, it's meant more to me than you can imagine. It's meant a lot to me too. I want you to know that regardless of what happens when we reach the capital, you'll always have my protection. And if you want to return to Talos, free when this is over, I'll make sure you have safe passage. Jake thought about his quiet life as a salvage engineer, his modest workshop, his simple routine of fixing broken things and avoiding complications. Thanks, he said. But I think I'd like to see how this ends before I decide whether to go back to my old life. It could be dangerous. Zara, I just spent 43 minutes in the cargo compartment of an experimental fighter while the Empress of the Veltani Empire used it to outrun a fleet of warships. I think my definition of dangerous has been permanently recalibrated. In that case, welcome to imperial politics. Should I be honored or terrified? Both. Definitely both. As they raced through hyperspace toward the heart of an empire in crisis, Jake Novak realized that helping a stranded warrior had turned into something far more significant than a simple rescue mission. He was now part of a story that could reshape the galaxy, and the woman he'd thought was a fighter pilot was actually one of the most powerful people in known space. It was, he reflected, definitely more excitement than he'd bargained for when he decided to investigate that crash site. But looking at the determined set of Zara's shoulders as she piloted them toward an uncertain future, Jake found himself oddly glad to be along for whatever came next. The imperial capital world of Veltani Prime appeared on their viewscreen like a jewel set against the darkness of space, vast cities of crystalline spires connected by streams of light that pulsed with the rhythm of interstellar commerce. Jake Novak pressed his face against the cargo compartment's small viewport and tried to comprehend the scale of what he was seeing. "That's impressive," he said, watching ships the size of small moons move through orbital traffic patterns that seemed impossibly complex. "The largest artificial structure in known space," Zara replied from the cockpit. "Home to 12 billion beings from over 200 species. The economic and political heart of the Veltani Empire. And somewhere down there, people are trying to kill you. Somewhere down there, people are trying to reshape the entire galactic political structure. Killing me is just a means to that end." Jake watched as their fighter approached the planet's defensive perimeter, noting the massive orbital platforms that bristled with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. "How do we get past the defenses? Imperial override codes. Assuming they haven't been changed since I left. And if they have been changed? Then this becomes a very short conversation." The next few minutes stretched like hours as automated defense systems scanned their ship, verified their identity, and slowly granted them passage through the multiple layers of orbital security. Jake realized he was holding his breath until Zara announced that they'd been cleared for approach to the Imperial Palace landing bays. "We made it," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We made it to the palace. Whether we made it to safety remains to be seen." As they descended through the planet's atmosphere, Jake got his first close look at the imperial capital. The palace complex alone covered an area the size of a continent, its towers reaching toward the sky like frozen waterfalls of light and crystal. Landing platforms extended from the main structure at various levels, accommodating everything from personal shuttles to diplomatic vessels the size of space stations. "Zara," Jake said as they approached their assigned landing bay, "I've never been anywhere like this before. I have no idea how to behave around imperial nobility. The same way you behaved around me for the past week. With honesty, competence, and a complete disregard for unnecessary protocol. I'm not sure that approach will work with other members of your court. It will work with the ones worth talking to. The others." She paused as the ship settled onto the landing platform. "The others are probably the ones trying to kill me." The landing bay was enormous, easily capable of accommodating dozens of ships. As they powered down their fighter, Jake could see figures approaching across the polished floor, tall, elegant beings in elaborate robes that seemed to shift color in the artificial light. "Your welcoming committee?" he asked. "My advisors. Assuming they're still loyal." "How can you tell?" "If they're loyal, they'll be relieved to see me alive. If they're not, they'll be disappointed." Jake squeezed himself out of the cargo compartment, grateful to stretch muscles that had been cramped for hours. As he emerged from the ship, he found himself facing a dozen beings who radiated the kind of authority that came from wielding significant political power. "Your Imperial Majesty," one of them said, stepping forward with what appeared to be genuine relief. "We feared the worst when your ship disappeared from our sensors." "Chancellor Velvar," Zara replied, and Jake noticed that her entire demeanor had shifted. Gone was the casual warrior he'd worked alongside for a week. In her place stood someone who moved with the natural authority of absolute power. Status report. The situation is complex. Admiral Thekvar has declared martial law in 3 outer systems, claiming you were killed in a terrorist attack. Senator Zulhan has called for emergency succession protocols. And General Mordak has mobilized the 8th Fleet, ostensibly to hunt for your assassins. Ostensibly. The 8th Fleet is currently positioned to blockade the core worlds if necessary. Jake listened to this exchange with growing understanding of just how precarious the situation had become. This wasn't just a simple assassination attempt, it was a coordinated effort to seize control of the entire empire. And our loyal forces? Zara asked. The 3rd and 7th Fleets remain under the command of officers we trust. The Imperial Guard is split, but the majority appear to be awaiting your return before taking sides. What about civilian leadership? The planetary governors are requesting clarification of your status. Several have already declared neutrality, which suggests they're preparing to recognize whoever emerges as the victor. Zara nodded, processing this information with the kind of calm efficiency that suggested she'd dealt with political crises before. Summon the loyal fleet commanders to an emergency council session. And arrange secure communications with the governors who are still undecided. Yes, Your Majesty. Chancellor Veldar paused, his gaze falling on Jake. And this individual? Jake Novak. The engineer who repaired my ship and ensured my survival. Zara's voice carried a note of warning. He is under my personal protection. Of course, Your Majesty. Shall we arrange quarters for Mr. Novak in the guest wing? He'll be staying in the palace technical facility. I'll need his expertise for several upcoming projects. Jake realized that Zara was essentially appointing him to an official position within the Imperial Court, giving him status and protection that would be difficult for potential enemies to challenge. As you wish, Your Majesty. The next several hours passed in a blur of meetings, briefings, and strategic planning sessions that left Jake feeling like he was trying to follow a conversation in a language he only partially understood. The scale of the crisis was staggering. The Veltani Empire controlled hundreds of star systems, and the political upheaval threatened to destabilize trade routes and defensive alliances that affected thousands of worlds. It's overwhelming, isn't it? Zara said during a brief break between meetings. They were standing on a balcony overlooking the palace's main courtyard, watching ships arrive and depart with the constant stream of diplomatic traffic. A little bit, Jake admitted. A week ago, the most complicated decision I had to make was which broken component to repair first. Now I'm listening to discussions about fleet movements that could affect billions of people. Are you regretting your decision to come here? Jake considered this question seriously. No. But I am starting to understand why you seemed so relieved to spend time pretending to be a normal person. This is what my life has been for the past 15 years. Constant crisis management, political maneuvering, and decisions that affect more lives than I can comprehend. How do you handle the pressure? By remembering why the Empire exists. By focusing on the good we can do when we work together instead of fighting each other. Their conversation was interrupted by Chancellor Veldar, who approached with the kind of urgency that suggested new developments. Your Majesty, we've received a communication from Admiral Thekvar. He's demanding that you appear before the Imperial Senate within 48 hours to prove your fitness to rule. And if I refuse? He'll ask the Senate to declare you unfit and install a military regent until proper succession can be arranged. Zara's expression hardened. A regent he would undoubtedly nominate. Most likely. What are our options? We could comply with his demand and appear before the Senate. We could refuse and risk being declared in violation of imperial law. Or. The Chancellor hesitated. Or what? Or we could demonstrate that you retain the loyalty of sufficient forces to make his demands irrelevant. Jake realized they were discussing the possibility of civil war, a conflict that could tear apart the largest political entity in known space. What would you recommend? Zara asked. I would recommend that you show the Empire why you deserve to be their Empress. Meaning that you use this crisis as an opportunity to demonstrate the principles you've been trying to implement. Show them that cooperation and technological advancement are more powerful than military force and political manipulation. Zara looked at Jake, and he could see her weighing the Chancellor's advice. Jake, she said, you've spent the past week working with Imperial technology. What did you think of it? It's incredibly advanced, but it's also isolated. Your people have developed amazing innovations, but they don't seem to share them with other species. That's been Imperial policy for centuries. We maintain technological superiority by keeping our advances secret. But what if you didn't? What if you shared some of your innovations in exchange for cooperation and alliance? Zara's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement Jake had seen when she was working on engineering problems. You're suggesting that I use technological diplomacy to counter the military coup. I'm suggesting that you show the galaxy why the Veltani Empire under your leadership is more valuable as an ally than as a conqueror. That would require sharing technologies that have been classified for decades. It would also require trusting other species with knowledge that could be used against you if they chose to betray that trust. Zara was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the vast cityscape that represented the heart of her empire. Chancellor, she said finally, arrange a meeting with the ambassadors from the major galactic powers. And prepare a comprehensive briefing on our most advanced cooperative technologies. Your Majesty, sharing classified technology is exactly what we're going to do. But we're going to do it in a way that demonstrates why cooperation is more powerful than domination. What do you have in mind? A demonstration. Something that shows the galaxy what we can accomplish when we work together instead of fighting each other. Jake found himself grinning as he realized what Zara was planning. You're going to turn this political crisis into a diplomatic opportunity. I'm going to prove that an empire based on cooperation is stronger than one based on conquest. And if it doesn't work, then at least we'll have tried something better than civil war. The next 48 hours transformed the Imperial Palace into a center of unprecedented diplomatic activity. Representatives from dozens of galactic powers arrived to witness what Zara was calling a new model for interstellar cooperation. Jake found himself appointed as Chief Technical Liaison, responsible for explaining Veltani innovations to beings whose understanding of technology ranged from primitive to incomprehensibly advanced. It was challenging work, but also deeply satisfying. For the first time in his career, he was using his engineering skills to build something rather than just repair what was broken. The neural interface technology you demonstrated, the Andorian ambassador said during one of the technical briefings, it could revolutionize starship design across the galaxy. If we share it freely, Jake replied, in exchange for cooperative agreements that benefit everyone involved. And what would the Veltani Empire gain from such arrangements? Partners instead of subjects. Allies instead of conquered territories. And the kind of technological advancement that comes from combining the best innovations from dozens of different species. When Admiral Thekvar arrived at the palace with his ultimatum, he found himself facing not just an empress, but a coalition of galactic powers who had already begun negotiating cooperative agreements that would make his military coup irrelevant. Your Majesty, he said, clearly struggling to maintain his authority in the face of such overwhelming diplomatic support, you cannot simply give away centuries of imperial technological advantages. I'm not giving them away, Admiral. I'm investing them in a future where the Veltani Empire leads through innovation and cooperation rather than through conquest and intimidation. And what of imperial security? What happens when our enemies possess our most advanced weapons? Our enemies become our partners. And our most advanced weapons become tools for building rather than destroying. The confrontation that followed was less a military coup than a debate about the future of galactic civilization. When the dust settled, Admiral Thekvar found himself commanding fleets that were no longer willing to follow orders that contradicted the Empress they had sworn to serve. So, Jake said as they watched the last of the disloyal officers being escorted from the palace, how does it feel to win a civil war through diplomacy? Like I finally found a use for all those political science classes I took as a princess, Zara replied with a smile that reminded him of the woman he'd worked alongside in his workshop. What happens now? Now we build the kind of empire I always wanted to create. One based on cooperation, technological advancement, and the belief that beings from different worlds can accomplish more together than they ever could apart. Sounds like interesting work. It will be. The question is whether you'd like to be part of it. Jake looked around the Imperial Palace, with its vast halls filled with representatives from across the galaxy, all working together on projects that could reshape interstellar civilization. What kind of position are you offering? Chief Engineer for Interspecies Technological Cooperation. You'd be responsible for overseeing joint research projects, facilitating technology transfers, and making sure that innovations actually work in practical applications. That sounds like exactly the kind of job that would get me in over my head very quickly. Probably. But you'd have the full resources of the Veltani Empire behind you, along with the cooperation of every major galactic power. And you'd be my boss. I'd be your Empress. But also your friend, if you'll have me. Jake considered the offer, a chance to work on technology that could change the galaxy, with resources beyond anything he'd ever imagined, alongside the most remarkable woman he'd ever met. One question, he said. What's that? Will I still get to have casual conversations with you, or will everything have to go through Imperial protocol from now on? Zara's smile was the same one he'd seen in his workshop when she'd been pretending to be a warrior instead of an empress. Jake, after what we've been through together, I think we can skip the formal protocol. In that case, Your Majesty, I accept. Just Zara, remember? Just Zara, who happens to be the Empress of the Veltani Empire and is currently reshaping galactic civilization through technological diplomacy. When you put it like that, it sounds almost impressive. It is impressive. And terrifying. And probably the most important thing either of us will ever be part of. Jake looked out at the vast city spreading below them, knowing that somewhere in those crystalline towers, teams of engineers from dozens of species were already working on projects that would change the way the galaxy thought about cooperation and technology. So, he said, what do we work on first? First, we design a new model of starship, one that incorporates the best innovations from every willing species, and proves that cooperation really can create something better than any single world could achieve alone. Sounds like a worthwhile project. It will be. Though I should warn you, working closely with an empress comes with certain complications. More complicated than spending a week repairing a ship while the pilot pretended to be someone completely different. Considerably more complicated. Jake grinned, feeling the same sense of anticipation he'd experienced when tackling a particularly challenging engineering problem. Well, he said, I've gotten used to my life being complicated. Besides, someone has to keep you grounded when all this imperial authority goes to your head. Is that your official job description now? Keeping the Empress grounded? Among other responsibilities. Such as making sure that when you're changing the galaxy through technological cooperation, you remember to take breaks for casual conversation and shared meals. That seems like an important responsibility. I think so too. As they stood together on the palace balcony, watching the sun set over the capital of an empire that was transforming itself into something entirely new, Jake Novak realized that helping a crashed warrior had led him to discover not just his empress, but his purpose. It was, he reflected, definitely more adventure than he'd expected when he'd first spotted that elegant scar across the desert landscape of Talos, 3. But looking at Zara as she planned the next phase of her diplomatic revolution, Jake found himself grateful for whatever cosmic coincidence had brought an empress disguised as a warrior into his quiet workshop. Some broken things, it turned out, were worth fixing regardless of how complicated the repair job became.